Part 1. Welcome to the worst time to be on land. Late Permian. Hey folks, let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed that nature seems to have this strange unspoken rule? Everything in the ocean has to be 10 times scarier than anything on land. Seriously, from deep-sea anglerfish to giant squids, life under the sea just seems cursed. But what if I told you there was a tiny forgotten window in Earth's ancient past, long before dinosaurs ever stomped the ground, where it was actually safer in the water than on land? Sounds backwards, I know. But welcome to the Lopingian epoch, the final stretch of the Permian period, roughly 259 to 252 million years ago. Yeah, buckle up, this one's going to get wild. The setting, an Earth you wouldn't recognize. First off, let's set the scene. The Earth back then wasn't just different, it was straight up alien. Days were only 22 hours long because the moon was closer and the Earth spun faster. The continents weren't scattered like they are today. Instead, they were jammed into one supercontinent called Pangaea. Africa, the Americas, India, Australia, and more were all mashed together into one massive landmass. To the east, you had a few free islands, not tropical paradises, just the scattered landmasses of what's now Siberia, Kazakhstan, North China, and parts of Southeast Asia. In between all this water, lots of it. But not just any oceans, the Tethys and Paleotethys, flanking Asia, and the mighty Panthalassa to the west. This last one, it covered over 60% of Earth's surface, twice the size of the modern Pacific Ocean. Just thinking about how massive that is gives me the chills. But funny enough, despite its epic scale, Panthalassa was not the worst place to be. The oceans were surprisingly chill. Let's talk marine life. Was it a little creepy? Sure, but compared to what was going on above water, honestly, kind of peaceful. Sharks had already been around for 200 million years at that point. You might have heard of the helicoprion, that one with the buzzsaw spiral jaw. Yeah, terrifying. But it was already extinct by this time. Other sharks were around, like Hesceadus, about 2 meters long, more leopard shark than sea monster, and some even smaller ones like the sphenacanthids and hybodonts, rarely over 1 meter. Most were designed to snack on squid, not tear you apart. The once famous sea scorpions, practically on life support, only a couple species remained, none of them large or particularly scary. You'd still find trilobites, ammonoids, and other critters, but many marine species were still reeling from the Capitanian mass extinction, a lesser-known but more deadly event than the one that took out the dinosaurs. Bottom line, the seas weren't great, but they were quiet, the real nightmare that was waiting on dry land. Land was a bloodbath sea. While marine life was still recovering, land creatures bounced back fast, and they came back meaner, hungrier, and weirder than ever. The dinocephalians, once the dominant land animals, had just gone extinct. That left a huge power vacuum. Rising to take their place were the gorgonopsids. And yeah, their name isn't subtle. Think Gorgon from Greek mythology, because that's what scientists thought of when they dug up their bones. These were the first saber-toothed predators to roam the earth. Imagine something that looked like a Smilodon saber-toothed cat, but wasn't a cat. Or even a mammal. Nope. These things were therapsids, mammal-like reptiles, kind of the evolutionary halfway house between reptiles and mammals. They had deep-set, slashing teeth, razor-sharp incisors, and long canines, narrow, sinister skulls. a powerful gait that let them move fast and hit hard. And they weren't small. In the early days, sure, some were no bigger than your foot. But by the late Permian, the most terrifying of them all had arrived. Enter the Inostrancevia. This was the apex predator of the late Permian, no debate. Inostrancevia was the biggest, baddest gorgonopsid of them all. It could grow up to 11 feet long, 3.5 meters, and weigh over 1,000 pounds, 450 kilos. That's bear-sized. For comparison, though, most individuals were closer to the size of a tiger. It had sturdy limbs built for speed and endurance. Its teeth, 15 long saber canines curved and serrated, made for slicing through flesh like butter. Nobody's sure exactly how it hunted. It might have gone for the Smilodon strategy, taking out the throat in one clean strike. Or maybe it played the long game, wounding prey and waiting for blood loss and shock to do the rest. Either way, not a fun way to go. Even worse, Inostrancevia wasn't a one-time freak. It lived across what's now Africa, Asia, and European Russia, adapting to everything from warm floodplains to icy deserts. Some paleontologists even believe it may have had fur to survive colder climates, though that's still up for debate. And just when you think that's the worst it can get, surprise! There were more gorgonopsids, and Inostrancevia might have been the biggest, but it wasn't alone. Dozens of other gorgonopsid species thrived during this time, especially in Russia and South Africa. In Russia, you had mid-sized ones like Suchogorgon and small but deadly species like Pravoslavlevia. But South Africa, that's where things really got wild. There a whole subfamily of gorgonopsids evolved separately, the Rubigini. These were stocky, power-built hunters with skulls that made up 15% of their body length. Their teeth were even more deeply serrated than Inostranczevia's. One standout was Rubigia atrox, which grew to about 10 feet long and likely coexisted with Inostrancevia, meaning, two apex predators sharing the same niche, probably fighting for dominance. So, if you were a poor herbivore wandering around late Permian South Africa, your chances of survival were zero. Part 2. The Planet of Predators, Therocephalians, Amphibians, and more. All right, so we've established that gorgonopsids ran the show during the late Permian. Giant, saber-toothed, not-quite mammals prowled every corner of Pangaea, from icy deserts in Russia to sun-baked plains in South Africa. But here's the twist. They weren't alone. This wasn't just the age of the gorgonopsids. It was a full-blown predator renaissance. A real pick-your-nightmare scenario, where every time you turned a corner, something new was evolving a new way to kill you. Let's dive back into the chaos, starting with the group that probably gave gorgonopsids the most competition. Enter the Therocephalians, underrated and deadly. Next up in our horror lineup, the Therocephalians. These guys might not get the same hype as gorgonopsids, but they were everywhere. Russia, Antarctica, Africa, China. You name it. The name Therocephalian literally means beast head, which gives you an idea of what we're dealing with. Like gorgonopsids, they were theropsids, early mammal relatives. But unlike gorgonopsids, they were often shorter, stockier, and in some cases, even stranger. You see, Therocephalians weren't just diverse, they were experimental. Some were tiny and venomous, others had giant heads and jaws. A few might have even lived semi-aquatic lifestyles. Let's break down a few of the key players. Ichthyops and Orosian, possibly venomous. There's a theory floating around that some therocephalians like Ichthyops and Orosian might have been among the first tetrapods to develop venom. If true, this changes a lot. It would mean that millions of years before snakes or lizards figured it out, these weird proto-mammals were already packing a toxic punch. The idea is based on grooves in the skull and jaw, possibly for venom glands and ducts, along with certain tooth shapes. It's not 100% confirmed, but it's an exciting and terrifying possibility. Moscorhinus, the apex of therocephalians. If there's one therocephalian that deserves top billing, it's Moscorhinus. Picture a jaguar-sized predator with a lion-sized head, huge conical teeth, a massive jaw capable of delivering devastating bites. Powerful forelimbs probably used to pin prey before tearing into them. This thing wasn't a side character. It was a main boss in the late Permian food chain. In fact, fossil evidence suggests Moscorhinus replaced gorgonopsids in some ecosystems as the dominant predator. Even more interesting, Moscorhinus was everywhere. You'll find fossils in South Africa, Russia, even Antarctica. It was adaptable, durable, and just as dangerous as its saber-toothed rivals. Megawhitesia, the giant mystery. And then there's Megawhitesia. This beast roamed European Russia and stretched up to 3 meters long, around 9 feet. It's the largest known therocephalian and quite possibly one of the most advanced. Coprolite's fossil poop linked to it suggests it fed on large prey like dicynodonts, another major herbivore group. But here's where it gets spicy. Some paleontologists believe Megawhitesia might have been venomous, like its smaller cousins. The skull has structures that might have housed venom glands, but the evidence is still being debated. Either way, the late Permian wasn't just crawling with predators, it was potentially venomous, ambush-driven, and biologically innovative. Reptiles joined the party, crocodile cousins and body armor. Just when you think it can't get worse, the reptiles show up. No, not dinosaurs. We're still a ways off from that. But the reptiles of the late Permian had already started branching out into some pretty terrifying designs. Proterosuchians and Croniosuchians. These were your croc-like killers, long, low bodies, powerful jaws, and often needle-like teeth. Proterosuchians were mainly terrestrial or semi-aquatic hunters found on almost every continent except North America and Antarctica. Croniosuchians had armored backs, giving them a prehistoric tank look. They could survive bites from even the toughest predators. And while they weren't huge, they were everywhere. Amphibians, giant, slimy, and hungry. Let's talk about the wild card in this ecosystem, the primitive amphibians. These weren't your modern frogs or toads. We're talking salamander-crocodile hybrids like something out of a fever dream. Many were ambush predators lurking in swamps and lakes, just waiting for something tasty to wander too close. The star of the show, Rhinocentrodon, up to 13 feet long, 4 meters. Found in South Africa, living right alongside gorgonopsids and therocephalians. It looked like a nightmare blend of salamander and crocodile and had the attitude to match. And Europe wasn't spared either. There you had the Melosaurus, a sleeker but still deadly predator stretching 10 feet long and haunting freshwater environments like a ghost. So yeah, don't go near the water either. You weren't safe on land, and you weren't safe in the swamp. Nature had you boxed in. Wait, what about the herbivores? With all these predators roaming around like it's a buffet, you'd think herbivores didn't stand a chance. But you'd be surprised. Despite everything, plant eaters managed to survive and even thrive in some areas. Lystrosaurus, the Permian badger tank. Imagine something shaped like a mix between a pig and a badger. Add in tusks, burrowing skills, and the resilience of a cockroach. That's Lystrosaurus, arguably the most successful Permian herbivore. These guys dug deep burrows to avoid predators, and they were tough. They even survived the great dying that wiped out most other species. Scutosaurus, the armored fortress, up to 1.2 tons, around the size of a large rhino. Heavily armored with bone plates and spikes. Lived mainly in European Russia, where predators were plentiful and hungry. This thing didn't run at tanked hits. With armor this thick, only the biggest and baddest predators stood a chance. Final thought for this chapter. By now, you're probably wondering, how did anything survive this? We've got venomous killers, saber-toothed giants, armored reptiles, and giant amphibians all jostling for dominance, and that's just scratching the surface. But believe it or not, things are going to get worse before they get better. Because we haven't even touched on the final boss yet, Mother Nature herself. The Earth is about to turn up the heat, literally. End of part 2. Ready for part 3, where we explore the extinction event that made the asteroid look like a paper cut. Part 3. The apocalypse before the dinosaurs. When Earth hit the reset button. All right, so you've made it through saber-toothed, not-quite mammals, venomous lizard-dog hybrids, crocodilian amphibians, and more predators than a Jurassic Park reboot. But just when you thought it couldn't get worse, Mother Nature walks in, looks at all this chaos, and says, let's start over. Because now we've arrived at the ultimate boss battle of the late Permian, the one thing that even the deadliest predator couldn't escape. The late Permian extinction, also known as the Great Dying. And trust me, that name is not an exaggeration. The Great Dying, Earth's worst extinction event? Yes, worse than the dinosaurs. Let's get this straight right out of the gate. The KT extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs bad. It eliminated around 17% of biological families on Earth. But the Great Dying tried 57% of all biological families, 83% of all genera, and possibly over 90% of all species. We're not talking about a bad day. We're talking about Earth nearly wiping the slate clean. And this wasn't from an asteroid. Nope. The leading theory, volcanoes. Gigantic ones. Blame it on Siberia, the Siberian traps. Somewhere around 252 million years ago in what's now Siberia, the planet decided to do a hard reboot. The Siberian traps, a massive volcanic region about the size of Western Europe, began erupting. But not like a few mountaintops rumbling. We're talking millions of years of non-stop volcanic activity. These eruptions spewed out lava flows a kilometer thick, released unfathomable amounts of carbon dioxide, CO2, and sulfur dioxide, SO2, covered millions of square kilometers with molten rock. It was a planetary-level ecological bomb, and the fallout brutal. Heat, death, and poisoned skies. The Earth quickly turned into something more closely resembling Venus than the blue marble we know today. global heating, CO2 levels soared, temperatures skyrocketed. Some regions hit year-round averages that matched Death Valley at its hottest. The equator became nearly uninhabitable. Oxygen crash. The surge in greenhouse gases led to ocean deoxygenation. Many marine organisms suffocated as hypoxia zones spread across the seas. Fish, coral, plankton, entire food webs collapsed. Acid rain and ocean acidification. Sulfur gases from the eruptions caused acid rain that poisoned freshwater systems and soil. Oceans became acidic hot tubs, dissolving shells and disrupting marine reproduction. UV radiation spike. Here's the final insult. Some studies suggest the ozone layer took a hit, possibly from massive volcanic chemical releases. As a result, UV radiation levels may have surged 5,000% in certain areas. Imagine standing outside and literally being cooked from above and below. On land, nothing was safe. If you think the carnivores we mentioned earlier had it bad, they did. But the herbivores and plant life, total annihilation. The temperature became too extreme for most ecosystems. Photosynthesis started failing. Massive die-offs in plant life triggered a collapse of the food chain. The great Scutosaurus, with all its armor, gone. Even the tough little Lystrosaurus, the burrowing pig-badger champion, barely scraped by. Entire ecosystems unraveled. Rivers dried. Forests withered, and as herbivores died off, predators followed in quick succession. What was once a thriving world of saber-teeth, armored giants, and venomous bitey things became a desolate wasteland. In the water, it got even worse. Ironically, while the land burned, the oceans boiled and choked. As temperatures climbed, deep sea waters became stagnant. Bacteria thrived in these low-oxygen conditions, releasing toxic gases like hydrogen sulfide, H2S. This gas rose from the depths, potentially poisoning coastal ecosystems and the atmosphere. Some models even suggest that entire swaths of ocean turned pink from the bacteria bloom. Pretty and completely lethal. And if that wasn't enough, the acidified seas eroded shells, shattered coral structures, and led to a mass collapse in nearly all marine life. Survivors, the lucky and weird. Few, so, who did make it? The survivors of the Great Dying were the scrappy, the weird, and the lucky. Lystrosaurus somehow made it through and went on to dominate the early Triassic. A few amphibians and small therocephalians adapted by burrowing or semi-aquatic living. Some of the earliest archosaurs, distant ancestors of dinosaurs and crocodiles, squeaked by in isolated regions. In the oceans, certain species of mollusks, bivalves, and small fish clung on in deep-water refuges. But these survivors were the exception, not the rule. Most of life, from the terrifying to the tiny, simply vanished. The reset, a world rebuilt. It would take millions of years for ecosystems to recover. In fact, recovery from the Great Dying was slower than any other extinction event in Earth's history. When life did rebound, it looked different. The Triassic period would eventually rise from the ashes, ushering in the first true dinosaurs, giant marine reptiles, early flying reptiles, and a brand new evolutionary path forward. But all of that came at a cost, the cost of one of the most brutal extinction events the planet has ever experienced. And that's the kicker. The late Permian wasn't just a wild chapter in prehistory. It was a turning point, a mass reboot that erased 90% of everything and laid the groundwork for the world we know today. So, why does it matter? You might be thinking, okay, cool story, but this was 250 million years ago. Why should I care? Well, here's the thing. The Great Dying wasn't caused by an asteroid. It wasn't random. It was triggered by rising CO2, global warming, acidification, and ecological collapse, all things we're flirting with right now. It's a reminder that Earth doesn't play favorites. It also doesn't issue warnings, just consequences. End of Part 3. Want to keep going? In Part 4, we'll zoom in on the weirdest survivors of the extinction and explore how life clawed its way back from the brink, leading directly to the rise of dinosaurs. Chat-GPT-Janoi. Part 4, Life After Death. How the survivors of the Great Dying shaped the world. So, the Great Dying scorched the land, boiled the seas, and nearly erased life itself. Out of the billions of creatures that once called the late Permian home, from saber-toothed gorgonopsids to armored scutosaurs to venom-dripping therocephalians, almost all were gone. Extinction wasn't just a disaster. It was an opportunity. Because in that silence, a few weird, scrappy survivors began crawling out from the ash, and they would set the stage for everything that came after, including the dinosaurs, mammals, and eventually us. Let's take a walk through the aftermath of Earth's worst extinction and meet the cast of misfits who inherited a broken world and somehow built it back up again. Scene 1. Welcome to the Triassic, the graveyard of giants. It's the early Triassic period now. About 252 million years ago, right after the Permian's final curtain call. What does the world look like? The supercontinent Pangaea is still holding strong, stretching pole to pole. The oceans are quiet. The coral reefs gone, most fish gone. The waters are warm, acidic, and eerily still. On land, the forests have withered. The ground is dry, cracked, barren, very few plants, very few bugs, very few anything. But here and there, something stirs. A burrow opens. A snout pokes out. A squat, tusked creature snuffles into the sunlight. It's the Lystrosaurus, the MVP of extinction survival. The underdog hero, Lystrosaurus. Let's talk about this absolute legend for a second. Lystrosaurus looked like a mashup of a pig, a badger, and a turtle. It was a dicynodont, a type of herbivorous therapsid with a beak and tusks. And for a period of time after the Great Dying, it made up an estimated 70 to 90% of all terrestrial vertebrates on Earth. Let that sink in. An animal that would have barely made an impression during the Permian suddenly became the default land vertebrate. Why did Lystrosaurus survive when almost nothing else did? Scientists have a few theories. Burrowing behavior. It may have dug deep enough to escape the worst of the heat and acid rain. Low oxygen tolerance. Its anatomy suggests it could handle environments with lower oxygen levels. Simple diet. It could eat tough plants that other herbivores couldn't stomach. Reproductive advantage. It probably reproduced quickly, filling empty ecosystems faster than slower breeders. Whatever the reason, this little guy ruled the world for millions of years while nature hit the reset button. Other survivors. The resilient and the strange. Lystrosaurus wasn't alone in the aftermath. A handful of other creatures limped through the apocalypse and began rebuilding life's blueprint. Proterosuchus, a primitive reptile with a long croc-like snout and sharp teeth. Technically, an archosauriform, a distant cousin to dinosaurs and crocodiles. These guys became some of the first terrestrial predators after the extinction. They weren't huge, but in a world where everything else was dead, size was relative. Therocephalians. Yup, some of the venomous saber-faced mammals in training made it too. The survivors tended to be smaller and more generalist, less specialized, and more adaptable. They held on to their niche as mid-level predators while the big guys were gone. Temnospondyls, the amphibians of this era. Huge. Think salamanders the size of crocodiles. These semi-aquatic beasts like Benthosuchus and Lidecarina dominated the waterways. They thrived in warm, stagnant freshwater systems, the only places that still had anything close to a working food web. Archosaur relatives. This is where things start to get interesting. Small, nimble reptilian creatures known as archosauromorphs survived in scattered pockets. These were the ancestors of crocodiles, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs. At the time, they were just one group among many. But over the next few million years, they'd seize their moment. Plants return. Slowly. What about the plant life? It's easy to forget, but after the Great Dying, even the forests were gone. Fungi briefly became dominant, not because they were tough, but because there was so much dead stuff to decompose. Eventually, fern-seed ferns and gymnosperms like conifers began returning. One way scientists know this, there's a global layer in the fossil record called the fern spike, a moment when ferns surged back before anything else. It took millions of years before full forests came back. Until then, Earth was mostly barren soil, scraggly shrubs, and dust. Evolution fills the gaps. Nature hates a vacuum. As the survivors spread out and mutated, the stage was set for new players to rise. Some of the changes that defined the post-Permian world: smaller body sizes, and adaptation to the harsh environment and limited food. Faster reproduction cycles crucial when ecosystems are unstable. More efficient metabolisms, especially important with oxygen, still scarce. These pressures created a petri dish of evolutionary experimentation. The survivors weren't just recovering, they were reshaping life itself. The dawn of the dinosaurs. Still a few acts away. Here's the part where many people expect dinosaurs to just stomp onto the stage. Not quite. It would take another 10-15 million years after the extinction before true dinosaurs showed up during the middle to late Triassic. But the groundwork was already being laid. The archosauriforms, which survived the Great Dying, diversified into Rauisuchians, land-dwelling, crocodile-like predators. Atosaurs, armored herbivores with pig snouts and scaly backs. Pseudosuchians, ancestors of modern crocs. And eventually, theropods, sauropodomorphs, and ornithischians, the first real dinosaurs. So while the Permian survivors didn't look like dinosaurs, they paved the way for them. No Gorgonopsid, no Lystrosaurus, no burrowing Therocephalian or croc-snouted Proterosuchus, no dinosaurs. Lessons from a broken world. If there's one thing to take away from this post-apocalyptic chapter of Earth's history, it's this: life is fragile, but it's also unbelievably resilient. Even when 90% of it vanished, evolution didn't stop. It paused, then pushed forward with everything it had left. In the face of scorching heat, poisoned skies, acidified seas, and extinction-level trauma, nature didn't give up. It adapted. It simplified. and then it rebuilt. End of Part 4. Want to keep going? In Part 5, we'll zoom into how the age of dinosaurs actually started, who won the evolutionary lottery, who got left behind, and how the first real dinosaur set foot on the post-apocalyptic Earth. ChatGPT, Junoi Part 5, The Rise of Dinosaurs, From Survival to Supremacy. All right, we've emerged from the smoking crater of the Permian apocalypse. We've watched strange survivors crawl out of the ash-tusked herbivores, croc-like reptiles, burrowing proto-mammals. And now, after millions of years of evolutionary chaos, we're about to witness a seismic shift in Earth's story. Because this is where the world finally starts to resemble something familiar. We're talking true dinosaurs, giant crocodile cousins, flying reptiles, and the early signs of the Mesozoic world, the one that would eventually be ruled by T-Rex, Triceratops, and yes, even Velociraptor. But it all begins right here, the Middle to Late Triassic period, a new cast of characters. By the time we hit the Middle Triassic, roughly 237 million years ago, the Earth had begun to stabilize. Oxygen levels were climbing. Temperatures, while still hot, were settling. Plants had returned, covering the supercontinent in patchy forests and ferns. Rivers, lakes, and swamps teemed with life again, and the survivors of the Great Dying. They weren't just clinging to life anymore, they were diversifying like crazy. Let's meet the new contenders in this evolutionary free-for-all. Archosaurs, the ruling reptiles. The big winners of the post-apocalyptic lottery were the archosaurs, a group of reptiles that includes crocodilians, dinosaurs, pterosaurs, flying reptiles, and all their extinct cousins. You could think of archosaurs as the Swiss Army knife of reptiles, fast, diverse, and adaptive. They split into two main branches. Pseudosuchians croc-line archosaurs includes ancestors of modern crocs. Avametatarsalans birdline archosaurs includes pterosaurs and eventually dinosaurs. In the beginning, Pseudosuchians ruled. These guys were wild and terrifying. Rauisuchians, massive upright predators. Some stood 3 to 4 meters tall and hunted on 2 legs, had skulls built like bludgeons and teeth like steak knives. These were the top predators of the Middle Triassic. They made the gorgonopsids of the Permian look like warm-up acts. Atosaurs, armored herbivores that looked like tank pigs, heavy, low-slung bodies with crocodile-like armor plating, dug up roots and plants with shovel-like snouts. They weren't fast, but they were walking shields perfect for surviving in a still dangerous world. Dinosaurs begin in the shadows. Now, let's talk about the main event. Yes, dinosaurs were around during this time, but they weren't exactly running the show yet. The earliest dinosaurs were small, fast, and bipedal, measured only 1 to 2 meters long, hunted insects, small reptiles, and whatever they could catch, lived in the shadow of larger archosaur predators. These early dinosaurs probably looked more like overgrown lizards with long legs than anything Jurassic Park would feature. But they had key advantages. Hollow bones, lighter, more agile. Fast metabolism, allowing more activity. Efficient stance, limbs under the body for better movement. These features didn't make them dominant yet, but they were primed for a breakout. The first true dinosaurs. Let's name names. The earliest known dinosaurs, dating to around 233 million years ago, include Herrerasaurus, one of the earliest true theropods. The group that includes T-Rex, around 3 meters long, sharp teeth, grasping claws, a classic predator build. Eoraptor, smaller and more primitive, likely an omnivore, helped establish the early path toward later carnivores and herbivores. Plateosaurus, a prosauropod ancestor of the giant long-necked sauropods, could grow up to 10 meters, one of the first dinosaur giants. Herbivorous and semi-quadrupedal, these weren't kings yet, but they were fast learners. And as the Triassic period marched toward its end, their competition, especially the powerful croc-line archosaurs, started to stumble. The second act of extinction. Around 201 million years ago, Earth decided to roll the dice again. A lesser-known but hugely important event took place, the end-Triassic extinction. Once again, volcanic activity, this time in the region that would become the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province Camp, triggered a climate crisis. CO2 levels surged, temperatures spiked, oceans acidified, and once dominant archosaurs, especially the croc-line predators, died out. But the dinosaurs, they survived. And without their competitors, they did more than just survive. They exploded. Dinosaurs take over. With the old guard gone, dinosaurs seized their moment. Theropods evolved into faster, smarter predators. Sauropodomorphs got huge, eventually becoming the long-necked titans like Apatosaurus and Brachiosaurus. Ornithischians emerged, the beaked herbivores that would include Triceratops, Ankylosaurus, and Stegosaurus. And with Pangea starting to break apart, dinosaurs spread into new continents, new climates, and new forms. By the time we hit the Jurassic period, dinosaurs weren't just one group of reptiles. They were the most successful land animals on Earth. Meanwhile, in the skies and seas, let's not forget, the Mesozoic wasn't just a dinosaur story. Pterosaurs, the first flying vertebrates, were already gliding through the skies by the late Triassic. Marine reptiles like ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs took over the oceans, replacing the primitive amphibians of the Permian. It was like nature had flipped the script. Where once it had been safer in the oceans during the Permian, now the seas had their own monsters, and the land once a graveyard was alive with thunder lizards, feathered beasts, and predators with serrated smiles. And the mammals, oh yeah, they were there too. The tiny, fuzzy descendants of the therapsids, the same group that had included gorgonopsids and therocephalians, were still hanging on. Early mammals were nocturnal, insect-eating, and very small. They lived in the margins, in burrows, trees, and shadows. But they would survive all 3 periods of the Mesozoic and outlast the dinosaurs. Their day would come, but for now, this was the age of dinosaurs. From the ashes of the Permian, let's zoom out for a second. In the span of about 50 million years, Earth went from a barren, post-apocalyptic wasteland with almost all species gone to a thriving global ecosystem dominated by reptiles, dinosaurs, and soaring giants. And it all started with the few oddballs that didn't die. Lystrosaurus and its digging claws, therocephalians with venomous bites, archosaurs with nimble legs and efficient lungs. They weren't just survivors. They were prototypes, blueprints for what came next. And through extinction, adaptation, and relentless experimentation, evolution didn't just recover. It built a new world. In Part 6, we'll close the loop, how the echoes of the Permian still shape life today, and what the great dying can teach us about Earth's future. Part 6, Echoes of Extinction. What the Permian can teach us about our future. All right, we've traveled from the darkest days of Earth's prehistory to the triumphant rise of dinosaurs, from a scorched post-apocalyptic Permian world to the flourishing reign of the Mesozoic titans. But now it's time to zoom back out to our time, because the story of the Permian extinction isn't just ancient history, it's a warning shot, a cautionary tale whispered through rocks, bones, and molecules. This isn't just about fossils, it's about patterns, and more importantly, about recognizing when they're repeating. A quick recap: what actually caused the Great Dying. Let's rewind just a bit. At the heart of the Permian-Triassic extinction, Earth's worst mass extinction, were a few key factors: volcanic activity on a continental scale, Siberian traps, skyrocketing CO2 levels, global warming, ocean acidification, oxygen depletion, destruction of the ozone layer, massive biodiversity loss. Sound familiar? That's because many of these very same environmental stressors are currently being accelerated by human activity. No, we're not erupting Siberia, but our carbon emissions, deforestation, and oceanic disruptions are creating eerily similar conditions. Let's break that down. Rising CO2 and climate change. Back in the late Permian, volcanic eruptions pumped out CO2, triggering a greenhouse effect that spiraled out of control. Temperatures soared, weather systems collapsed, life couldn't keep up. Today, we're releasing over 35 billion metric tons of CO2 every year. Global temperatures are rising faster than in any known period of natural history. Entire ecosystems, from coral reefs to boreal forests, are on the edge. The scary part: during the Permian, it took thousands of years for CO2 to build up to catastrophic levels. We've done it in just a few centuries. Ocean acidification. Back then, the oceans became so acidic that shell-forming creatures couldn't survive. Food chains collapsed from the bottom up. Today, our oceans have absorbed over 30% of human-generated CO2, and it's already affecting coral reefs, bleaching and dying en masse. Plankton, the foundation of marine food webs. Oysters and clams can't form proper shells. And just like in the Permian, this is leading to mass marine die-offs, oxygen depletion, hypoxia. In the aftermath of the Permian extinction, oceans became low in oxygen, creating dead zones that suffocated life. Sound distant. Modern oceans already have over 400 identified hypoxic zones. Places like the Gulf of Mexico and Baltic Sea now experience annual die-offs of fish and shellfish. Fertilizer runoff and climate change are both to blame. Again, same pattern, faster timeline. Biodiversity loss. In the Permian, 90% of all species vanished. It wasn't one bad year. It was a multi-millennia collapse of ecosystems. Today, scientists estimate that we are living through the sixth mass extinction, driven not by volcanoes, but by habitat destruction, pollution, climate change, invasive species, overfishing, and hunting. According to a 2019 UN report, over 1 million species are at risk of extinction in the coming decades. Amphibians, insects, and marine life are especially vulnerable, just like in the Permian. The parallels are chilling. What made the Permian so deadly? One word: cascade. The Permian extinction didn't happen because of one thing. It happened because everything collapsed at once. Ecosystems fell like dominoes. Species that relied on others for food pollination habitat were stranded. Once the base of the food web collapsed, the top followed. Recovery took 10 million years. Now, ask yourself, what would happen if Earth's pollinators, plankton, or soil microbes were wiped out today? We're not immune to cascade events. We've just never seen one on that scale yet. Hope isn't lost, but time is running out. This isn't all doom and gloom. The Permian tells us something else too. Life can come back. Evolution is resilient, and we have the power to act before it's too late. Unlike trilobites or gorgonopsids, we know what's happening. We understand atmospheric chemistry. We can measure ocean acidity. We have the technology to change course. And we still have time. What can we do? This isn't a Save the Whales infomercial. This is about the survival of systems that keep us alive. Here's what actually matters. 1. Cut emissions. Now. Shift to renewable energy. Electrify transportation. Phase out fossil fuels quickly, not eventually. 2. Protect ecosystems, stop deforestation. Conserve marine sanctuaries. Restore wetlands and biodiversity hotspots. 3. Rebuild food web support, regenerative agriculture. Ban destructive fishing practices. Preserve pollinators. 4. Innovate for adaptation. Develop climate-resilient crops. Re-engineer cities for heat and water stress. Use AI and biotech for sustainable systems. This isn't optional anymore. It's existential. Final thoughts. The Permian still speaks. It's easy to think of the Permian-Triassic extinction as something disconnected from our world. After all, it was 250 million years ago. No humans, no mammals, just monsters and lava. But here's the truth. The Earth has a memory, and in its bones, it's warning us. The signs are there. The parallels are clear. But the outcome, that's still up to us. We can repeat the Permian, or we can learn from it. If evolution has taught us anything, it's this. Extinction is always on the table, but so is transformation. Choose wisely. Thanks for watching. And if you made it this far, you're officially a paleontological powerhouse. Until next time on Onyx Zoo.